Thanks for doing this. Is this your first Substack live?
This is the first time, yeah. So,
I'm the person who brings on all these individuals to Substack app. I feel good. I feel proud. And folks who are joining us right now, you probably got us in mid conversation. First time I'm actually talking to Noah Berlatsky, fantastic reporter. He's here because he wrote a great piece for Aaron Rupar's Public Notice, and it's the first time he's doing a Substack app live conversation. Noah, shamelessly promote yourself and how people can subscribe to your
sure.
Substack.
All right. Well, my Substack is Everything is Horrible, and yeah, I write political commentary and other things, but I also get to write for Aaron on occasion. So I'm excited to talk about the piece I wrote for Public Notice.
And you can clearly see Noah is an optimist among us. And specifically, Noah wrote this piece, and there's a lot of examples of this, but Noah wrote this piece once it was announced that Terry Moran, who used to be an ABC News correspondent, was suspended by ABC News for essentially opining on Stephen Miller, one of the most odious human beings on earth, and Donald Trump, saying, I would say, mostly truths, and in no way, shape, or form being out of pocket when compared to what Fox, One American News Network, Daily Wire, and other right wing outlets openly say, not just about Joe Biden, Clinton, Obama, but pretty much any Democrat or anyone who they dislike. ABC News bent the knee. ABC News has already done a settlement with Donald Trump, even though they didn't have to. But he was pissed off that George Stephanopoulos called him a rapist, which, for all intents and purposes, was the exact same language that the judge said was no difference between calling Donald Trump a rapist or a sexual assaulter when he was held liable for sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll and also defaming her. And so we've seen numerous examples, which I know Noah's going to unpack, of corporate media bending the knee. And the framing of it, which I got from your article of today's conversation, which I agree with, is corporate media paving the road for fascism through normalcy and civility. And with that, I yield the floor to you, Noah.
Yeah. Well, as I said in my piece, Terry Moran, Terry Moran called. He was on social media and he called Stephen Miller a world class hater and Donald Trump a world class hater. And there's a lot of evidence that this is true. Stephen Miller there's been a lot of reporting that about sort of emails between him and Breitbart.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think in 2015, when he was sort
Yep.
of like, they were consulting with him on coverage, and he kept linking to places like VDare, which are, sort of an open white nationalist website. And, he's been super enthusiastic about promoting great replacement theory, which has resulted in has inspired multiple shooters, um, in, including the shooting at uh, in Pittsburgh, which was the worst anti-Semitic attack in American history.
Tree of
So
Life,
there's
Tree of Life Synagogue,
That's right. Yeah,
Poway, and I'm
right.
really glad the gardener decided to come right at this moment and blow the blower right outside the window, which is, I'm sure, MAGA sent up. But hopefully you all can hear me. But what Noah's talking about, the replacement theory, is literally a white nationalist Nazi conspiracy theory that has radicalized terrorist acts against Jews, against Latinos in El Paso, in New Zealand, Christchurch, against Muslims. And speaking about him being a world class hater, I'm glad you mentioned that because people forget. I brought it up the past week that in the first administration, Stephen Miller used to send white nationalist content to this lady, this young reporter at the time, who was a white nationalist and has since essentially become de-radicalized. And she openly said, yeah, he said, publish this and send this vis-a-vis Breitbart. So he has been a world-class hater throughout his entire life without any subtlety, Noah. Like, he doesn't even hide it.
No. So, Terry Moran wrote that, which seems like a reasonable thing to say to me. And, ABC quickly, and then the Trump administration sort of both privately and publicly said that he should be punished. And ABC rushed to then punish him. And, so there's this idea that you need to portray neutrality. But, I mean, like, wouldn't part of showing you're neutral be trying to, like, demonstrate independence from the actual administration? But they're not really interested in doing that.
Can I
And
quote, because you mentioned this quote in your piece, and I'm glad you did. Caroline Levitt went on Fox and said, quote, ABC is going to have to answer for what their so-called journalists put out on Twitter. We have reached out to ABC. They have said they will be taking action. So they will see what they do. Hopefully, this journalist will either be suspended or terminated. And that was June 8th.
yeah, and then they, I mean, just a few hours later, they suspended him. And Oliver Darcy, a media reporter, has said that, he said that in his opinion, I mean, these decisions come from corporate. So it's, I mean, it's Disney who owns ABC, and the conglomeration of media and the sort of centralization of media has meant that all these news orgs are part of these giant media conglomerates. And those media conglomerates, I mean, they don't really they see it as a niche market, they see it as maybe like making them a little money, but mostly they don't want them to like damage they don't want Trump to start, attacking Disney again or trying to sue Disney or getting in their way if they ever want mergers. I mean, they have corporate interests which are much more important to them than, you know, opposing fascism, which isn't opposing fascism isn't necessarily profitable. It's sort of difficult. It's messy. They don't really want to bother. So, you get this situation where the independent media, where the press just isn't that interested in, its own independence. And I mean, it's kind of even sort of like starker, as you said, with George Stephanopoulos, who said that Trump was a rapist and that, I mean, that Trump has been held civilly liable for sexual assault, which includes, actions which are not rape under the New York Penal Code, but which the judge in the case, said most people would consider this rape. Obviously, the judge was deliberately trying to say that this should, that you should be able to say that Donald Trump is a rapist without being, sued. And ABC, rather than taking that case to court, they settled and they settled, and they settled before they had to give depositions. They settled before the case could actually really start to embarrass Trump, who again has been held liable for this. Like, going over all these
They
details
would have
of
won the case. They would have won
they
the
would have won
case.
the case.
New
Right.
York
They would
v.
have
Sullivan. It's First Amendment. Like it's settled. We have robust protections. There was no need for them to
they would have
settle.
right. So the settlement was essentially a bribe to Trump. So, I mean, like worse than just like worse than just kind of caving, they're actually like, basically paying him for protection, which then, I mean, and then of course, as soon as anybody else, sort of speaks up, they kick them to the curb. So it's just really kind of pretty dire in terms of what the media is willing to, the media is just not willing to sort of like call fascism, which is bad because like, our Constitution is under fascist assault. And people need to know that. And if the media isn't going to tell them, then we're really, that's really bad.
We're effed. And can you tell everyone? I try to remind folks that what's happening at ABC is not limited to ABC. It's not limited to Terry Moran, who just announced yesterday that he's going to go on Substack. It's also across the board. Tell them what's happening with CBS right now and Paramount.
Yeah, I mean, Paramount. I mean, there's various discussions about this, but I mean, there's a lot of signs that 60 Minutes is losing its independence. The reporters have said on air that they're worried about losing their independence. Paramount is engaged in they're trying to do mergers, and they don't want Trump to mess with their mergers. And so there's a lot of pressure from corporate not to say negative things about Donald Trump. Trump was particularly incensed about this idea that they'd edited Kamala Harris's interview to make her look more, coherent, which is preposterous, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Um,
And
and there's
he's suing them for 20 billion for that reason.
or something preposterous, right? And it's not just, it's not just the television networks, because, right? I mean, we saw the LA Times and the Washington Post, both, even before the election, they cut ads, right? I mean, they cut op-eds. They refused to let their papers endorse Kamala Harris, the higher ups. And I just saw a piece by Jeff Bezos about um about the basically the fascist federal attack on Los Angeles. And they had a piece where they had an expert saying this is this attack on the states is unprecedented. And the Washington Post printed next to printed after he'd said that, they said, oh, but he's made small donations to Democratic candidates, this expert.
Mm.
Which is like, so basically they got this expert and then they like deliberately like tried to invalidate his testimony on bullshit grounds. But worse than that, I mean, if you do that to somebody, right? If you have them in you put their name in the paper and you essentially say, this is a biased Democratic hack, right? Like that person is likely to get death threats, right? I mean, like you get far right people who read the paper who like wouldn't necessarily like otherwise even notice it, right? I mean, it's just like and I mean, it's kind of like yeah, go harass this guy, and I mean, that's just a terrible thing for
It's been happening for 10 years, Noah. It's no, we don't have to imagine it because even in the first Trump administration, I want to remind everyone that Donald Trump celebrated violence against protesters. Told his MAGA base that, hey, beat them up. I'll pay for your legal fees. He also radicalized his base to look at anyone who opposes him as the enemy of the state, the enemy of the people, which is Stalin's words. You had Caesar, a Trumper, sorry for that. The Caesar Sayak, who was a Trumper, who's in jail right now because he had a hit list and he sent these fake, these not fake, these very real bombs to CNN. And if you and I remember that one day where CNN was live and had to actually operate outside of the New York City headquarters because they had threats. And so remember that one day where all of a sudden Anderson Cooper's on the street and Don Lemon's on the street. So for the past 10 years, Donald Trump has shown you that he holds anyone who criticizes him in contempt. And for 10 years, Noah, what's bothered me is they haven't learned. They have thought maybe if we bend the knee this time, they'll like us. Maybe if we bring on a Scott Jennings and give him let him, derail Abby Phillips' show for every night and give him a raise, they'll love us. Maybe if we give, a column space to Chris Rufio, a man who openly said that he is using the New York Times and Washington Post to Trojan horse DI bullshit. Maybe they'll like us. And they still hate them. And then I give you Jake Tapper, the Jake Tapper of it all. I'm assuming you have opinions on Jake Tapper. I yield the floor to you on the Tapper of it all.
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying is, you sort of imagine, Jake Tapper sort of like rushing to like, the end of the burning, wreckage of democracy and, shouting to like all the bleaching bones, saying, FDR was in a wheelchair. As if, like it's breaking news. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean,
You're not
you can.
even stretching it that much. You're not even stretching it that much because as Donald Trump was unleashing the National Guard over the weekend, Jake Tapper tweeted about Joe Biden's health.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, Joe Biden's health was a real issue, which is why it was like covered obsessively during the campaign. I mean, people there was no lack of news on Joe Biden's health. And and in fact, like it was such a big story. It was so important that he stepped down. And I mean, he was not the eventual candidate. And I mean, you can argue back and forth about like, did he step down early enough? Did we have enough information? But people did not. Like Joe Biden being old is not news to anyone. And it's just, I mean, I thought it was especially like, when he went on some show and he was like, oh, it's worse than Watergate. And like, first of all, it's not worse than Watergate. But second of all, like, is that the thing to compare it to? Like there's lots of abuses right now that are worse than Watergate. I mean, the president of the United States has just, illegally taken control of like of the California National Guard. That seems like an important scandal. That seems like an important danger to, the Republic. And Jake Tapper's interest in only talking about Biden is, I mean, like it's pretty obvious that like the issue is that he doesn't want to challenge Trump because challenging Trump could get you in trouble. Like he could sue CNN. He could, he could yell at Jake. He could demand that they fire Jake Tapper in particular. It's just like, I mean, it's this very craven, I mean, the media in this country has, you know, often in the past, like people like Jake Tapper would not have to worry about being targeted by the president. And it seems like he didn't enter, it's like you'd hope that they'd enter to like speak truth to power and to challenge power. But, like it's just increasingly obvious that like they just kind of wanted a paycheck and like to be on TV. And, like when the rubber hits the road, they're like, oh, well, I didn't actually want to get in trouble with anyone. I'll just,
But at what cost? I've kept quoting Born Identity a lot because that quote's been on my mind for the last 10 years. Look at what they make you give. His ratings have gone down. MAGA hates him even more because they said, oh, you were complicit and hiding this from us. So, you bending the knee to placate MAGA and their wrath has only incensed their wrath. And not only that, the others think you're a cuck and are mocking you. You've lost your own base. Donald Trump, when it comes to CBS is trying to placate him. I don't know if you all saw this news because I keep the receipts, but CBS, just like ABC, has no reason whatsoever to settle with Donald Trump because his claims are all bullshit. CBS offered Donald Trump $25 million, Noah, a couple of weeks ago, and $20 million. Donald Trump rejected it and says, I want $25 million and an apology. And so right now they're going back and forth. And look, ABC News, as you mentioned, for no reason whatsoever, threw George Stephanopoulos under the bus, settled for no reason, even though they would have won the case just to make him happy. But bullies, like fascists, right? It's never enough. They want more, more, more. And I'm thinking, like, am I living in the upside down where after 10 years, have they not learned? All right. So I understand the corporate institutions, right? Okay. Corporate institutions, just like the industrialists during Hitler's age, they thought, why let a genocide get in the way of a good deal, right? But how about these other individuals? Like, I haven't seen such a robust, um, if you will, act of solidarity with Terry Moran. I haven't seen all these other anchors come out and like say, we got your back. I give credit where credit's due. Scott Peely came out as the face of 60 Minutes, and he really said some robust words publicly. But other than that, like, where's the other, like, if you will, counterparts on CBS and ABC and Fox who are standing up for Terry Moran and saying, yo, why did you cave and bully this man out of his profession? And by the way, why is Fox allowed to call us pedophiles and rapists and lie and promote conspiracies, which is why they lost that $700 million lawsuit with Dominion? How come they're allowed to beat us up, but we still play by these rigged rules? What am I missing, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think people just keep hoping that he'll go after somebody else, right? And that if they just cower sufficiently, it'll be all better. And I think that there's also, part of the issue is that some of the people who kind of like cower in this way, I mean, they kind of like Trump, or they like things about him. I mean, you look at the New York Times coverage of trans issues, for example, right? Which isn't really, I mean, it's not really kowtowing to Trump. I mean, to some extent, it's like I think management there has this vision of them, swaying right wing voters, which is insane. They all hate the New York Times. But I mean, I think that there is some, oh, if we only add enough conservative voices, or if we only, jump on the conservative moral panics, we'll be, they'll like us and we'll sell more papers or something, or we'll be more legitimate. So I think there is some of that sort of impulse. But I think also, I mean, like whoever's in charge at the Times, like they don't like trans people. I mean, like
Seems pretty
they
clear.
yeah, I mean, like they are like on the one hand they're trying to kowtow to Trump, but they also like have a certain amount of sincere bigotry, where they actually they're like, yeah, these trans people have gone too far. We need to use our power to like hurt them and like get them back in their place. So I think that there's a mix of it in terms of people with real reactionary sentiments and who are on board with certain moral panics and who really distrust and dislike certain marginalized groups, kind of like And you see that, I mean, that's the case with with Colombia and their, and the way that they've just like completely folded. And that's in part because, they're trying to like not get Trump to take away money, but it's also because they've got a lot of people on the board who like really like this idea that the main purpose of the institution should be to punish Palestinian protesters, and that what's really needed is like a crackdown on anyone who criticizes Israel, and more broadly a crackdown on, all progressives. So I think it's a mix of people who have some, ideological sympathy, and that kind of intertwines with being afraid. So that, I mean, eventually you're kind of like, it's kind of unclear. Are you like, are you a sincere fascist? Or are you
A
just kind of
coward.
afraid? Are you a coward? I mean, it doesn't have to be one or the other is what I'm saying. I mean,
But
often
it
there's
doesn't
elements
matter,
of
right?
both.
Because at the end of the day, the complicity nonetheless helps the fascist machine. And there's one point I want to stress that you brought up is that how some people in these institutions, especially corporate institutions, look, I was at CNN for a year. I've written for New York Times, The Atlantic. I've spoken at the Aspen Ideas Festival, New York. I had an interesting career where I've always been independent, but then they make the mistake of inviting me. And then they think that I'm like the good Muslim or the good brown person. I'm just the same as I've always been. But I get like an insider's view to these folks. And I shared this story recently where I was invited to Aspen Ideas Festival a couple years ago, right? And this was as Jordan Peterson was ascending. And Jordan Peterson was in conversation with the can't make this shit up, Barry Weiss, because of course. And so I'm like, me and like five, six other people of color, a few of them, I won't mention them. We were in this room. And I'm like, all right, I want to see why Jordan Peterson is ascending. Maybe he's selling something, right? Maybe there's some brilliance here. So I sat there and I listened. I'm being hand on my heart. He was rambling for an hour. A lot of big words that didn't make sense. Barry did not challenge him and push back. I was given like third row access because I knew someone at the Atlantic. Like, yeah, sit here. And the two rows in front of me were old, very wealthy white people. Aspen is also known as Billionaires Mountain, who were eating this up, this nonsense. And basically, if I could give you the cliff notes of what he said was a return to 1950s hierarchy. And he said every society needs a specific strata and hierarchy. And essentially, when we had the hierarchy of white Christian men on top, that's what was better. I'm just kidding. That's Cliff Notes. And he sadly was unable to articulate it. It was just a bunch of word salad. Then afterwards, I couldn't resist. I share with folks. There was a small meeting in the hotel, not a meeting, but like, there's couches in the hotel. And someone said, come sit with us. And it was Jordan Peterson, Barry Weiss, and like five or six other people. So I just sat and I listened. And the guy was sitting right in front of me and he looked unwell. Like he just looked unwell. And I messaged a few friends of mine. I'm like, man, this guy, Jordan Peterson, who's like influencing the minds of like so many middle-aged suburban dads and young men, guys, he didn't look well to me. Like he looked spiritually, emotionally unwell. And then later we found out he was eating beef and apparently like, addicted to drugs. And then there was a billionaire there who sat down and he said, "Oh yeah, I support Jordan." And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Because he speaks out against Me Too. Me Too's gone too far." I'm like, this was right when Me Too started. I'm like, Me Too's gone too far. So I'm like, that's why I support him. And I know a lot of those people there, those editors of these the James Bennett's of them all, they were the ones who said the wokeness was going too far, BLM and Me Too. So the reason for my little rant here, folks, is Noah did touch upon this, that within these institutions, there are a lot of, not exclusively, but a lot of white men who felt deeply threatened by BLM protests, DEI, Me Too, and felt like, as they told me, they were being replaced. And now you have that on top of corporate media, you know, don't don't uh don't rattle the cages, don't rock the boat, just keep it moving. And furthermore, hey, these darkies, these blacks, these trans, these Muslims, I think they need to be put in their place. That's something I'm glad, Noah, that you brought up, that not enough people are talking about, this institutional incestuous complicity of a lot of people in power who belong to a certain tribe. And you and me, to quote George Carlin, it's a big club and we ain't in it.
Well, and I think that that's especially, I mean, as I said, I think it's especially true after with the Palestinian protests. I mean, like you saw a lot of Democrats and, a lot, I mean, like just Bill Ackman. I mean, like, like a lot of people who sort of saw that as really like, crushing student protest is really like a thing fascists do, because students are often sort of among those who sort of like organize against fascism. And educational institutions are often, are institutions that are often not, I mean, they're imperfect, but they're often, I mean, they support free speech. They support a lot of stuff that fascists do not. This idea of, sort of like vigorous intellectual communities. I mean, fascists. You saw in Hungary too. Fascists went after institutions of higher learning. So they're always
Media, higher learning, academia, media, and judges.
right. So they're trying to. They want. It's a source of resistance to fascism, but like, so ideally, you would have seen Democrats who are, currently under attack by a fascist party. Ideally, they would have found some way to sort of support protesters, because if you don't support them now, like, they be there when, you kind of need an anti-fascist resistance. And, and they did it, right? I mean, like, Democrats were not entirely, but almost unified in like condemning the protests and, in really kind of like collaborating in eroding free speech protections and in trying to erode, sort of the idea that protesters deserve solidarity, or that you even have a right to protest. And I think Angus Johnson, who on Blue Sky, who does he's a historian of protests and social movements. I mean, he was talking about, that like Democrats in LA have had trouble sort of finding a way to sort of stand with the protesters.
Yep.
There haven't been a lot of Democrats who are marching with them, right? I mean, there are some people who have sort of like, forcefully said they have the right to protest. I think Kamala Harris did, actually. She was able to, do that. But other people are kind of like, I mean, like, Gavin Newsom, they're like, there was a statement, or Karen Bass, I'm sorry, it was, issued a statement where it was like, the main thing was like, oh, we no violence. But of course, the violence is coming from ICE, not from protesters, largely. So just like, you can see that that people have gotten themselves in a situation where they're reluctant to show solidarity, or to express solidarity, or trying to figure out how to position themselves. And I think that's in part the legacy of, this, how badly they sort of betrayed these student protesters. And yeah, it's just got us in a
Well,
bad
so,
place.
I mean, and you mentioned, the both sides, the objectivity, the civility, and you put it in quotation marks, and the crackdown on the student protests, right? Bad faith attacks and talking points, literally like repeating APAC talking points. Dana Bash, remember what Dana Bash did? Like one of the most shameful segments on CNN, which it seemed like she was just repeating Israeli talking points and bashing these protests, not really giving it nuance, not talking about the fact there were Jews oftentimes leading this, that, they weren't related to Hamas, that within the universities it was overwhelmingly peaceful, that actually the crackdown on students is against Palestinian and pro-Palestinian students. We just found out that the University of Michigan paid money to an outside private security firm to go against its students, right? And Democrats didn't step up, right? Democrats stayed cowed, corporate interests, right? You had Democrats vote for the Lake and Riley Act. It wouldn't have passed without Democrats. You had Democrats pretty much say nothing on Abrego Kilmar Garcia, right? You had Democrats say nothing about Mahmoud Khalil. You had Democrats say nothing about,
Well, Chris,
Remain.
Chris Van Houten went down there,
Well,
right?
then I'm saying but then you had Van Hollen, who went down there, one senator, to El Salvador, said, "I'm not going to leave until proof of life." It was forced to be then in the news. Then Democrats came out and said, "Oh, this is a political winner," right? And then what happened, folks? I tried to keep the receipts. Van Hollen went by himself to get proof of life of Abrego Kilmar Garcia. Was in the news. The polls came out that Abrego Kilmar Garcia, as an issue, was negative double digits for Donald Trump. After that happened, a whole bunch of senators, about I think almost a dozen, then went to Louisiana, the detention center, where Rumeza Ostrich, the 30-year-old grad student, was kidnapped. Remember her for writing an op-ed?
Mhm.
And Mahmoud Khalil was detained. And then they visited. That was in the news. Rumeza got released. Badr Khan Suri got released. Uh, m- uh, the Columbia student who literally went for his citizenship test, he got released. Inshallah, I hope they're saying Mahmoud Khalil is going to get released. Well, at least the judge said it. But it just goes to show you, right? When it was cowardice and complicity, Noah, when it came to immigration, when it came to the students, when it came to the attack on the press, it has never helped. It has only helped fascists. I think all of it's connected because voila, that cowardice allowed Trump to say, no one's going to stop me. Let me unleash the National Guard and the military against students. And speaking about how this is so important right now is this is not normal, Noah. Like this is not normal to have the National Guard and military unleashed against the public. Take a step before that, to even have ICE, masked ICE agents, terrorize communities is not normal. And instead, what we got was this neutered language. Well, ICE is doing his job, and some protesters are stepping up. Like just the framing of what we've seen in the past week. Can you break that down when it comes to objectivity, civility, and both sides?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, the whole idea that the press's objective is, of course, I mean, everybody has their point of view, and often, so objectivity often doesn't mean, oh, we're, we're actually neutral. It often means, we're nobody in power is going to object to what we're saying. And I think that, especially now, it's often being used. I mean, this kind of both sides framing where you avoid saying the truth, where you avoid kind of weighing in on whether something's true or not, and instead you like quote the Republicans and then you quote the Democrats and then you say, well, the truth's probably somewhere in between. I mean, like that. So I think some people are in fact committed to that as an approach, which is bad in itself, right? I mean, I think that that's silly. It's a silly way to approach things. It's especially like, when there's a fascist party who's committed to like, they just lie all the time. That's what fascists do. So, being unwilling to sort of like tell your readers and your viewers that, this is a lie is betraying your viewers and, betraying the truth and, you know, failing the country as it faces fascism. But I think, kind of like in some cases it's worse than that in that they don't even really necessarily believe in objectivity, or that's not what they're fighting. They're just using, this, oh, we need to be objective as an excuse to sort of like cave. And I
Mm.
think that you see that. I think that's what happens with ABC. I mean, like, would they like have suspended this person you know for like a tweet? I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, I mean, he's been there like decades. Um, but I mean, they so they say, oh, it's outside of our standards or it's not objective, and that's a way to sort of like be an excuse to do what they want, which is to not contest fascism and to do whatever the people in power say. So,
It's right, but you know what really bothers me? It's not both sides. They don't even do both sides. If you do both sides, and if you are objective and you are being civil, even if it's performative, then truly do it. They don't commit. And the proof of that is a Scott Jennings. A proof of that is a Fox News, a One American News Network, where they just mock and ridicule Joe Biden and spread lies. And there's no pressure, right? It's almost like this. You give me civility, I give you cruelty. I get safe spaces for myself, no safe spaces for you. I demand that you follow my rules, but I don't have to follow any rules. And I'm going to mock you and ridicule you and punch you in the face, and you're going to sit there and take it. And they say yes.
right, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, yeah, and so, and then I think the through line that you're connecting to, and what I'm harping on, is in their performative civility and objectivity, which is all bullshit, because we clearly see Biden's health, Biden's health. Where are the okay? Let's just use this. Biden's health. Okay, what about Donald Trump's health? Biden's age. What about Donald Trump's age? Biden hasn't released all his reports. I still don't have the report of Donald Trump's health after his assassination attempt. Uh, Biden, did you see he stuttered? Friggin' Donald Trump tripped a couple of days ago. Do you see he tripped twice while trying to climb up the stairs? Where's the both sides? If that was Biden, that would be on the news 24/7, though, right? Biden did not fall asleep during the Pope Francis's funeral. You know who did? Donald Trump. And so what we're seeing now is not just both sides or objectivity or civility. I agree with you. I think we're seeing complicity. And at this point, with corporate media engaging in this type of behavior, it is aiding fascism, Noah. Like they are aiding not just fascism, they are participating in their own self-immolation because the ratings are going down, the reputation is going down. And Noah, writing about this, what do you think is the end game for them? Like, do they see themselves as the frogs in boiling water right now, or do they still think they'll be alive and safe and healthy and happy, getting the lucrative contracts and sipping wine and being invited to all these incestuous parties in New York and DC?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what they're thinking. I mean, I think they're scrambling, right? I mean, as the kind of, as the media kind of collapses around them. I mean, you see Jake Tapper, I mean, he's kind of gone all in on insulting the left now and being like, oh, it's all the fault of the left.
Yeah.
I think that y- there's this, they don't want to annoy Trump. They're afraid that they're kind of afraid of the conservative market. They want the conservative market, but the conservative market won't come to them. So they're angry at those folks. But that's not they really get angrier at the people who they feel like, are supposed to sort of like be unquestioningly on their side. You're supposed to just keep watching, even if they, kind of are obviously not opposing fascism. You're supposed to be like, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I think kind of like increasing anger and irrelevance, which I mean, it's not good. I mean, like
No,
it's bad. It's bad to have, media institute. I mean, like independent journalism is great, but it's also important to have, like journalism with some institutional power and
I
institutional
agree
power,
with you.
right? Because
I
I mean,
agree.
if you're an independent journalist, like if Donald Trump sues you as an independent journalist, like what do you do? I mean, like it becomes very difficult because like, you don't have those, you know, ABC could fight that lawsuit. I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? I mean, that's why it's so
And it would have won.
they would have won and they have the reason. I mean, like the whole point of having like journalist institutions like that, which have sort of like money and capital and power, is that they can withstand attacks. I mean, it's the same thing with universities, right? Like, Columbia has this huge endowment. Like, they have the resources to push back if they're willing to push back. And if they're not willing to push back, I mean, that undermines the institution itself, right? Because people lose trust in it. I mean, and they lose trust in themselves even, I mean, like people are, like it's hard to do your job when, I mean, like, morale is not great when you see your institution caving. Um, but, and then there aren't like individuals can resist and individual journalists can kind of do great work and that's important. But, without the institutional power behind it, it's much more difficult. And so,
You know,
yeah,
I agree with you, Noah, and I've always said this, because you can hold multiple truths at the same time. As a person who, I was a commentator for a year at CNN. I was 5 years contributing op-ed writer at New York Times. Like I said, I've had a foot in these places. I've published in these places. You need institutions to be relevant. You need institutions to be credible. You need institutions to be robust because they have the not just the money and the training and the staff and the resources, right? But they also have a legacy. They have name. They have reputation. People believe in this stuff, right? So once they put out good content, people could believe in it. But once they put out bad content, people also believe in it. So you want a robust news organization like a New York Times, a Washington Post, a CNN, other places like this to actually do good work because there are institutional names that are well known throughout the world, right? And there's so many people, folks, who work there who are doing good work. I know a lot of folks who care deeply. But at the end of the day, going back full circle, when it becomes corporate, the North Star, folks, is not truth. The North Star is not being the fourth estate. The North Star is not accountability. The North Star is not informing people. The North Star is not holding the powerful accountable. The North Star, folks, becomes money, ratings, access to power. That is the North Star. And you're seeing that right now with Paramount throwing CBS News and its jewel, 60 Minutes, under the bus, ABC throwing George Stephanopoulos under the bus, ABC throwing Terry Moran under the bus, CNN literally giving a raise to Scott Jennings to spew bullshit. The way Scott Jennings acts is because he knows nothing will happen to him. Scott Jennings has replaced Rick Santorum, who replaced Jeffrey Lord, and I was the one asked to always debate all of them. And it was always a double standard, right? When I was at CNN, to spill some more tea, I got 4 warnings, Noah, and I never narked, I never snitched. I took on all of them, and the 4 warnings was because Rebecca Cutler, who now runs MSNBC, I've never been uninvited on MSNBC, used to be the head of talent, and you could tell she used to call me. She did not want to call me. She could tell she wanted to do anything else but call me. And she had to perform, be like, now, Waj, you know your colleagues, you have to treat them well. Why? Because Scott Jennings whined like a little bee because he didn't like me debating him. I got 3.5 warnings because some right wingers complained I was being unfair. Never happened the other way. And that, you always have to give them their safe space. You always have to be civil to them as they mock you, ridicule you, and punch you in the face. And I always kept saying, why? Like, what are you going to do about these guys? I literally, one time they called me and said, you have to be nice to this guy. And I'm like, this guy is literally mocking your network, the network we work for. Why are you calling me? And my contract was not renewed. But that was less to do with me. It happened with the pandemic. But my relationship with everyone was good. But I saw the double standards while I worked there. And this was 5, 6 years ago, Noah. So it's become worse. And at the end of the day, you have to ask yourselves, this performative objectivity, folks, this civility, is it not just complicity? And going back full circle with the framing of today's conversation with Noah, are they not now literally paving the way for fascism as 4,000 National Guard troops and the Marines are unleashed against U.S. citizens and residents who are protesting ICE agents terrorizing their communities and kidnapping their family members? Something for you all to think about. Noah, I want to give you the last word, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicity. I mean, I think I think they see themselves as just, hoping to wait it out till Trump is gone, maybe. But, I mean, that's the thing about fascism. You can't be sure he's going to ever be gone. So
And
it's,
fascists
it,
come for everyone at the
yeah,
end.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I mean, I wrote a piece about Martin Niemöller a while back, who's, famous, first they came for the Jews. And I mean, the thing about Niemöller that people don't necessarily know is that he was like that the poem and how it's quoted suggests that he was indifferent, but that's not really true. He was actually a committed anti-Semite, and he was a committed Nazi. But eventually they crossed a line for him, which was that they went after Jewish converts to
Yep.
Lutheranism, and he felt a commitment to those people who had converted, and he ended up in the camps themselves. And I think the lesson there is not just you need to act now, but that you need to stand in solidarity even with people, like, even if you're like, I don't really like those people. I don't really like those protesters. I don't like what they're
The
doing.
trans, I don't get them. The undocumented. Oh, the blacks, the
Right.
women, the
Right. You
Muslims, the
gotta, you
Jews.
gotta, even if you're kind of like, I don't really like those people, you've got to stand with them because otherwise we're all screwed.
The pro-Palestinian activists, they're unruly. That won't bother me and my kids. Well, now
It
they're coming after
will.
everyone's kids. Now they're literally ICE, folks, is lying to abduct children from elementary school in LA. And if they can do it in LA, what's to stop them from doing to Texas, Chicago, New York, or even red states, folks? Fascists come after everyone. Noah, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the
Yeah.
time.
Thank you for asking me.
I was supposed to ask you for 30, but I kept you for 45. This was Noah's first time, folks. And I know
Looks
we
like
got
you're so.
about 750 people joining us. For those who joined us late, I'm going to have this up in about an hour. You can watch the entire conversation. There'll be a transcript. And folks, my mom reminded me last night that today is the 1 year anniversary of the Left Hook. I started this a year
Oh
ago.
wow.
And I thought, hey, I thought if I get 10,000 people, that's nice. So we're at 71,000 people. I've kept everything for free. There are no paywalls because I am a fool and a terrible capitalist. But you pay what you can. I've kept it super cheap, $5. It goes a long way. I have 3 kids. If you can pay, please do. I know times are tough. If you can't pay, become a free subscriber and share the content. I always try to bring on really informed, intelligent people like Noah who should be getting more time on corporate news media, but don't. And zero BS. And the one thing I hope you always appreciate is we'll call a spade a spade. If it's a white supremacist, we'll say it. If it's a fascism, we'll call it out. Too much is at stake. And all of our warnings, I'm like, we're like the world's worst Cassandras. It's the world's worst I told you so. It's all coming true. And if you don't believe me, folks, open your eyes, dare I say, be woke and see what's happening in LA. See the tanks rolling down the streets in DC for this military parade. This is where we are, folks. And if you don't think it could happen here, you're suffering from a failure of imagination. Noah, shamelessly promote yourself before you leave.
Yeah, my Substack is Everything is Horrible. Everything there is pretty much free too. But yeah, if you can help me out, that'd be great because this is there's fewer and fewer opportunities in corporate media for the reasons we discussed for left commenters. So
Yeah,
if you
but
can
you know
help,
what?
that'd be great.
It's growing here, folks. So thank you, everyone. Be kind, take care of yourselves, be informed, and please, oh please, don't be a fascist. Until next time, Noah. Later, man.